Maddox Vale stepped out of the black SUV, sunglasses low on his nose, the salty air clinging to his crisp white shirt as the ocean breeze tousled his dark hair. He hadn't planned on staying long, but something about the quiet beach town tugged at him. The hotel didn't look like much from the outside. Simple, sun-bleached wood and a hand-painted sign that read Coral Bay Inn, but it was private, and that's what he needed. No paparazzi, no board meetings, no investors breathing down his neck. Just a few days alone before flying back to New York to finalize the biggest deal of his career. He pushed the glass door open, the soft chime above it tinkling. "Hi there, checking in," the voice caught him mid-step. Bright, warm. Completely unprepared for the punch it delivered straight to his chest. She stood behind the reception desk like she owned the sun. Hair the color of dark honey pulled into a messy braid, a sea glass pendant resting just above her collarbone, and eyes, God, those eyes like stormy skies right before the rain. "Yeah," he said, blinking once. "Maddox Vale." "I booked the suite." Her fingers danced across the computer keyboard, then paused. "You're a day early." "I needed out of the city," he muttered, tugging his sunglasses off and sliding them into his jacket pocket. "Is it a problem?" She shrugged, smiling. "Not unless you hate ocean views and fresh-baked cinnamon rolls." He stared at her. "Do you always flirt with your guests?" Her smile didn't falter. "Only the ones who look like they haven't smiled in a year." Taché, she handed him a brass key, not a key card, an actual key. "I'm Maren Jaye," she said. "If you need anything, I'm here all week." He nodded, gripping the key like it had suddenly become significant. As he turned to head toward the suite, her voice stopped him. "Mr. Vale," he glanced back, "you might want to leave your shoes off when you go to the beach. Sand gets into everything." He didn't know why that made him pause, but it did. The suite was small, nothing like the penthouse he owned in Manhattan or the lake house in Vermont. No marble floors, no butler. Just whitewashed walls, a king bed, and a balcony that overlooked the water. But it was quiet. He kicked off his shoes, loosened his collar, and sat on the edge of the bed. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, 3 missed calls from his assistant, 2 from the board and 1 from his ex. He powered it off. The next morning, the smell of cinnamon lured him downstairs. Maren stood behind the counter of the little cafe attached to the lobby, apron wrapped around her waist, pulling trays out of the oven like she owned the place. "You bake too?" he asked, leaning on the counter. "I do a lot of things," she replied, not looking up. "You seem like someone who doesn't relax easily." "That obvious?" She slid a steaming roll onto a plate and handed it to him. "Try this. Then go sit on the beach for an hour. I'll check on you." He raised an eyebrow. "You babysit all your guests, only the grumpy ones," he laughed. Actually laughed. He walked to the beach barefoot, cinnamon roll in hand, and sat under the umbrella she'd set up. He didn't even remember telling her his favorite coffee order, but it was waiting in a to-go cup next to the chair. Black, no sugar. The sun rose higher, the waves rolled in, and for the first time in months, Maddox let his shoulders fall. Over the next few days, he saw her everywhere. Cleaning rooms, watering the plants out front, reading dog-eared books behind the desk. Once he caught her coaxing an elderly couple into dancing to soft jazz playing on the lobby radio. She was light. And he couldn't look away, and she didn't treat him like anyone special. It was disarming. One evening, he found her sitting on the porch steps, her hair down, the sky melting into pinks and golds behind her. He sat beside her without asking. "You don't wear expensive watches," she said softly, eyes on the horizon. "But that's a Patek Philippe, isn't it?" He looked down at his wrist. "Yeah, so you're someone important." He didn't answer right away. "Not here," she smiled at that. "Good, then I can still beat you at beach volleyball tomorrow." "You think I'll play? You will." He did. She was competitive, quick, and laughed when he fell face first in the sand. Later that night, she handed him a towel and a slice of watermelon and said, "You're not as uptight as you look." He stared at her, heart thudding harder than it should. "You always this blunt." "I don't like wasting time." Her honesty hit something in him. Something he didn't even know had been aching. He didn't kiss her, But he wanted to. The next afternoon, a storm rolled in fast. The beach emptied. Thunder cracked. Maddox walked into the lobby soaked just as the power flickered out. Maren was lighting candles. "Romantic," he said, brushing water off his jacket. She turned, startled. "You okay?" "I've been through worse," he said. "I like storms," she said. "Makes everything feel new afterward." They stood there in the flickering light, silence stretching between them like a held breath. Then she said, "What are you running from, Maddox?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward. "I don't know what this is," he said, "but I haven't stopped thinking about you since the moment you said my name." She blinked. "You're not just saying that because the lights are out," he chuckled. "No, but if this storm lasts longer, I might say more." She looked up at him, eyes searching. "Then say it." He didn't kiss her, but this time she kissed him, and everything changed. Rain hammered the rooftop all through the night, but Maddox didn't leave the inn. Not after that kiss. Not when her fingers had curled into his shirt like she was afraid he'd vanish if she let go. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world rinsed clean. The beach glistened like polished glass, and the air carried that crisp, post-rain clarity. Maddox sat at one of the cafe tables by the window, watching Maren arrange fresh flowers into a ceramic pitcher on the counter. "You always make things look like they belong in a postcard," he asked, cradling a mug of coffee she'd handed him without asking. She didn't glance up. "Only when I like who's looking," his brows lifted. "That wasn't subtle." "I'm not subtle," she said, setting a sprig of lavender just so. "You're the one who hides behind pressed shirts and three-word answers." He leaned back in the chair. "You want longer answers? I want real ones." Maddox looked out at the surf, then back at her. "You're used to people giving you their truths right away." "No," she replied. "But I'm not used to them pretending they don't want to." He set the mug down. "My father used to say that wanting something too much makes you weak." She stilled. "Do you believe that?" "I used to." Maren finally looked at him then, something unreadable in her expression. "And now, I'm trying not to." She untied her apron and walked around the counter, tossing it onto a hook. "Come on." "Where?" "Somewhere you can't hide behind your wallet." He followed her out the back entrance, past a row of wind chimes and tangled vines. The path curved through coastal pines, winding toward the cliffs. She hiked ahead of him, not bothering to slow her pace even though the trail was slick. "You bring all your guests up here?" he asked, ducking under a low branch. "Only the ones who forget how to breathe." When they reached the top, the view hit him like a punch to the ribs. Waves crashed against the rocks below, endless and wild. The wind rushed past them, and for a second, Maddox felt something break loose inside him, something he'd kept locked up for too long. Maren sat cross-legged on a weathered bench, hugging her knees. "You ever wonder what your life would look like if you'd made one different choice?" He stood beside her. "Every day." "I almost left this place once," she said, watching the horizon. "Packed a bag, bought a bus ticket. But my mom had just gotten sick and I couldn't go." He turned his head slowly. "She's gone," Maren nodded. 3 years now." "I'm sorry." She loved this inn, she said, her voice softer now. Said it was the only thing she ever built with her bare hands. I didn't understand it back then. Now I do. Maddox sat down beside her, elbows on his knees. "You built something too. It's more than a hotel, Maren." She gave a small laugh. "Don't get sentimental on me, Manhattan." He looked at her, really looked. "What would have happened if you'd gotten on that bus?" "I wouldn't have met you," she said simply. His throat tightened. That night they didn't kiss. They cooked dinner instead, her in bare feet, him rolling up his sleeves as she bossed him around her tiny kitchen like he'd never prepared a meal in his life. The space smelled like garlic and fresh basil, and she laughed when he tried to use a steak knife to dice tomatoes. "You're hopeless," she said, brushing past him to take over. "I build companies," he replied. "Not marinara sauce." "Well, this one's mine," she said, stirring the pot. "And you're just a guest in it." After they ate, she pulled out an old Polaroid camera and snapped a picture of him mid-laugh, sauce on his cheek. He reached for it, but she tucked it into a drawer with dozens of others. You don't get to keep it. Why not? Because I don't give away pieces of my story that easily. The next morning, a black town car idled at the curb. He hadn't called it, but his assistant had known his schedule. The board meeting in New York was set. And the merger, the one he'd spent a year orchestrating, was closing in 48 hours. Maren stood beside the lobby desk, arms folded loosely, expression unreadable. I didn't ask them to come, he said. I know. I'll postpone. No, you won't, he stepped closer. Why does it feel like we're saying goodbye? Because we are, she said. And I don't believe in pretending otherwise. He searched her face. You're not even going to ask me to stay? I don't want a man who needs convincing. His jaw clenched. You're not making this easy. She stepped around the desk. It's not supposed to be easy, Maddox, but it also doesn't need to be complicated. You leave, I stay. Life keeps moving. He took her hand, fingers curling around hers almost instinctively. I'll be back. She didn't promise to wait. Didn't ask when. Just squeezed his hand once before letting go. As the car pulled away, he looked back through the tinted window. She stood on the porch, hair whipping in the wind, not waving. That night, in his penthouse high above the city, he stared at the skyline and realized the silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like missing something he'd never meant to lose. 2 weeks passed. Maddox stared at the projection screen in the boardroom, the numbers blurring together. The merger had gone through without a hitch. The tech acquisition had exceeded expectations. Every shareholder in the room was smiling except him. He loosened his tie as the meeting wrapped, ignoring the congratulations. The applause sounded like static. None of them noticed the way he kept clenching his jaw, or that his phone hadn't left airplane mode since he landed in the city. Back in his office, he closed the door behind him and sank into the leather chair. The skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, glittering like it always did. But the light didn't reach him. He pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside, beneath a stack of documents, was a Polaroid, the only one he'd taken from her drawer when she wasn't looking. Her hand had been on his shoulder, her head tilted back in laughter. He hadn't even realized she'd taken it until he found it tucked into the front pocket of his bag when he unpacked. He hadn't called her, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what version of himself she'd be willing to let back in. A knock interrupted the silence. Mr. Vale, his assistant said, peeking in. Your driver's waiting. The gala starts in an hour. He nodded once. The Vale Foundation's annual charity gala was the kind of event where everyone wore their best masks, polished tuxedos, designer gowns, practiced smiles. Maddox arrived at the venue in a midnight black suit, his tie knotted with precision, his expression unreadable. He greeted donors, posed for photographs, gave a brief speech that earned polite applause. It should have felt like a triumph. Instead, it felt hollow. Didn't think I'd see you tonight, came a voice behind him, crisp with amusement. He turned. It was Georgia Lane, his ex. She stood in a crimson gown, glass of champagne in one hand and curiosity in her eyes. I'm still on the board, he said coolly. You're also still avoiding calls. I've been busy. She studied him. Since when does busy look like guilt? I'm not interested in playing games. She took a sip of her drink. Then stop pretending you're not in love with someone who probably doesn't even know the half of who you are. He didn't respond. Georgia raised a brow. You think you're the only one who noticed. You came back different, Maddox. You don't look at this world the same. He turned away, but her next words stopped him. She must have mattered. He didn't look back. Later that night, he left early. The moment the valet brought his car around, he slid inside and gave an address that hadn't left his mind since he returned. He drove through the night. By dawn, the beach town came into view. The town looked the same: quiet streets, shuttered cafes, the salty wind curling through the air. But the Coral Bay Inn had changed. The front sign was gone, replaced by one freshly carved, the Jaye House. He parked and stepped out, walking slowly toward the porch. The inn hadn't been painted, but the garden was fuller, and a new wind chime hung near the entrance, catching the early morning breeze. He knocked twice, no answer. He tried the handle. Unlocked. Inside, the lobby was empty. A record player sat on the desk, softly spinning something old and jazzy. The scent of lemonwood floated in the air. He stepped farther in, footsteps echoed from upstairs, then the creak of floorboards. She came down the staircase barefoot, hair damp, a paint-stained sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder. When her eyes landed on him, she stopped. Neither of them spoke. He took a breath. "You changed the name." "I inherited it," she said. "Figured it was time to make it mine." He nodded once. "It suits you." She stepped off the last stair. "What are you doing here?" "I left something," he said quietly. She crossed her arms. "You should have told me you were leaving that morning." "I didn't plan it. My assistant sent the car. I thought if I stayed longer, I'd find a reason not to go. You didn't call." I didn't know what to say. Anything would have been better than nothing. He stepped closer. "You asked me once what I was running from. I think I finally figured it out." She waited. "I built a life that looked perfect on paper, but I never let anyone in far enough to know it was empty. You made it impossible to keep doing that." She didn't move. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the Polaroid. "I found this in my bag after I left." I stared at it for 2 weeks, trying to convince myself it was just a moment. She looked at the photo, then up at him. And I was wrong. It wasn't just a moment. It was the only thing real." Her voice was steady. "You think showing up now makes that okay?" "No," he said. "I think showing up now is the only thing I know how to do. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to come back and tell you the truth." She studied him, eyes unreadable. "And what is the truth, Maddox?" "I'm in love with you." The words landed between them, raw and certain, no fanfare. No hesitation. She took a step forward. "You think that fixes everything?" "No," he said. "But I think it's the only place we can start." Her fingers brushed the photo in his hand. "I kept the one you stole," he added. That made her lips twitch, but not in amusement, something softer, sadder. "I can't be part of your world," she said. "I'm not asking you to be." "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking if I can be part of yours." The silence stretched. Then she turned and walked past him into the kitchen. He followed, unsure what to expect. She opened a drawer and pulled out a clean mug, poured him coffee without asking, set it on the counter. "You'll need to repaint the porch railing," she said. He blinked. "What?" "And the guest room on the second floor needs new shelves. You're tall." "You can help." Are you saying?" "I'm saying you can stay," she interrupted, "if you're willing to work for it." He stepped forward, hope threading through his chest like sunrise light. "I'll do whatever it takes." She met his gaze head-on. "Then start with breakfast," she said. "I hate cooking when I'm mad," he grinned, already moving toward the fridge. "You're mad?" "I'm furious." He cracked an egg. "Noted." "And you'll sleep in the guest room," she added quickly. "Of course." "For now," he paused, looked back at her. "For now," she repeated. And this time, she didn't stop him when he reached for her hand. The sun had climbed high by the time Maddox set down the last of the wooden planks beside the porch. He wiped the back of his neck with his sleeve and leaned against the railing that now stood straighter and sturdier than it had in years. Maren stepped out from the side entrance with a glass of fresh lemonade, her gaze sweeping over the work. "You missed a spot," she said, handing him the glass. "I didn't," he replied, taking a long sip. "But if you want to give me something else to fix, I'll take it. Don't tempt me. There's the attic window that sticks and the pantry door that squeaks." He raised an eyebrow. "You're keeping a list." She didn't answer, just walked across the porch and sat on the swing he'd reinforced that morning. The chains no longer groaned when she moved. Her legs swung slowly, toes brushing the wooden boards. "You know, I never thought someone who wears cufflinks would be good with a drill." "I wasn't," he said, "but I watched 3 tutorials and electrocuted myself once. I've earned this lemonade." She tilted her head. "You didn't have to prove anything to me, Maddox." "I wasn't trying to." He stood straighter, meeting her eyes. "I needed to prove it to myself." She didn't respond right away, not with words. Instead, she patted the empty space beside her. He walked over and sat, close enough that their knees touched when the swing shifted. "You didn't ask about the name change," she said after a moment. "You didn't owe me an explanation." Maybe not, but I want to tell you, he waited. My mother always said I had her stubbornness and my father's sense of timing, which was terrible. He came back into our lives a year before she died, showed up drunk and broke, tried to claim the inn. I took him to court and won. She looked down at her hands. I changed the name the day the papers came through. Maddox exhaled slowly. You didn't just inherit this place, you fought for it, she nodded, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it again. That's why I didn't chase you. I would have let you, I know. That's why I didn't. The swing moved gently beneath them. I've been thinking, he said, dangerous. He smiled. I've spent the last decade growing a company I'm barely interested in anymore. I go to meetings I hate, wear suits that don't matter, and cater to people who wouldn't notice if I disappeared. You're not going to tell me you want to move here, are you? He glanced at her. What if I did? She blinked. You'd hate it by the second week. No espresso bars, no chauffeurs, no skyline. Maybe I'm done chasing things that look good from a distance. She frowned, unsure. You'd really give it all up? No, he said. But I'd change what I'm building. I already have. I transferred control of the board last week. I'm restructuring everything, keeping the foundation, selling off the rest. She stared at him. You're serious? I'm not here for a vacation, Maren. I'm here because I don't want to live a life that doesn't have you in it. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. I don't expect you to make space for me, he continued. I want to earn it, brick by brick if I have to. She stood suddenly and walked to the edge of the porch, arms crossed against the faint breeze. He followed, stopping just behind her. I don't want a fairy tale, Maddox, she said without turning. I want something real, something that doesn't fall apart the second it's tested, and your world, it doesn't feel real to people like me. He stepped beside her. Maybe that's because I didn't know what real was until I met you. She turned then, slowly, eyes searching his face. I'm not asking you to change who you are, she said. But I need to know you're not just swept up in the simplicity of this place. I was swept up in you. Silence stretched again, but it felt different this time, not heavy, full. She took his hand. There's a summer festival next weekend. Locals bring pies, music plays too loud, and the kids run wild. It's not a gala, you'll probably hate it. I'll be there. Her lips curled this time, not in defiance or doubt, just warmth. That night he stayed in the guest room again. But the door between their rooms stayed open for the first time. By the time the festival came around, Maddox had replaced the attic window, fixed the pantry door, and learned how to make her coffee the exact way she liked it, strong, with a splash of honey. He wore jeans that still felt a bit foreign and a t-shirt that had paint on the sleeve from when they'd redone the front sign together. The town gathered in the park beneath strings of lights, and Maren walked beside him, her hand in his like it had always belonged there. People noticed, whispered. But no one asked questions. He danced with her under the stars, badly, and laughed when she spun out of rhythm just to throw him off. Later, while she stepped away to help an elderly neighbor carry chairs, a man approached Maddox near the lemonade table. You're the one who used to be on magazine covers, right? The man asked. Big company in the city, Maddox nodded. So what are you doing here? He looked toward Maren, who was laughing at something the neighbor said, her hair catching the amber glow of the festival lights. Building something better. The man nodded once, then walked away. When Maren returned, she handed him a slice of peach pie and nudged him toward a bench beneath the trees. You just going to stare at me all night? She asked, settling beside him. Probably. You're impossible. You kissed me first, remember? She leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm never letting you forget that. I'm counting on it. Weeks passed. The beach grew quieter as autumn approached, but the inn stayed full. Word had spread about the renovations, about the new name, about the man who used to own half of Manhattan now fixing porch swings and baking blueberry muffins on Tuesdays. Maddox didn't miss the skyline. He missed nothing. One morning, she found him on the porch, sanding the edge of a new bench. You're up early, she said. I couldn't sleep. Why? He stood slowly and reached into his back pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Her breath hitched. I've made a lot of mistakes, he said, opening it. But the only thing I've done right without hesitation was loving you." She stared at the ring, simple, elegant, a single sapphire surrounded by soft gold. "I didn't plan on falling for the woman behind the reception desk," he said. "But I can't imagine a future that doesn't start and end with you." Maren's voice was barely a whisper. "You asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to build a life with me right here, right now, not a fairy tale, just us." She didn't cry, she didn't hesitate. She reached for his hand, slipped the ring onto her finger and whispered, "Yes." He kissed her there, beneath the porch she'd rebuilt from memory and love, and this time neither of them let go. Maren stood in front of the mirror, her fingers smoothing down the bodice of the pale gold dress. The fabric shimmered faintly in the sunlight pouring through the lace curtains, catching the warmth of late afternoon. Her reflection hardly felt like her barefoot, her hair swept to one side, the sea glass necklace she'd worn every day since her mother passed resting above her heart. Behind her, the familiar creak of the porch door echoed, followed by a quiet knock on the bedroom frame. "Is it bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony if she's not wearing white?" she asked without turning. Maddox leaned against the doorframe, no tie, sleeves rolled just above his forearms. "You could wear a potato sack and I'd still be speechless." She met his eyes in the mirror. "You're not supposed to see me yet. I couldn't wait." His voice was steady, but there was a rough edge to it, like he'd been holding something back. "You're not nervous?" Maren turned, her hands settling on her hips. "I'm about to marry a man who tried to fix a leaking roof in a rainstorm without a tarp. I should be terrified." His mouth curved. "It held, didn't it?" "Barely," she said, but her tone had softened. "You really want to do this here?" "No ballroom, no press, no five-star catering. I want to do it exactly like this. With the people who actually matter. In the place where I finally stopped running." There were no chairs lined up in rows, no aisle draped in satin. Just driftwood benches arranged in a half-circle near the edge of the bluff, wildflowers tucked into mason jars, and the ocean stretching out behind it, all like a promise. Dylan, the town's retired mailman, had been ordained online the week before and stood ready in a linen shirt, grinning behind his reading glasses. As the breeze tugged gently at her hem, Maren walked toward Maddox barefoot, the grass warm beneath her toes. The guests, mostly townspeople, friends, and a few relatives she hadn't seen in years, stood silently as she passed, a few wiping tears, others smiling like they'd known this ending all along. Maddox didn't look away once. Not when she reached him, not when she took his hands. "You still want to build a life here?" she asked so only he could hear. "I already started." Dylan cleared his throat and launched into a brief speech about love being found in unexpected places, about stubborn hearts learning to bend, and how sometimes the person who changes your life forever walks in looking for nothing at all. "I wasn't looking for anything," Maddox said, eyes locked on Maren, "and then I saw you. You didn't smile for 3 days," she whispered. "I was already falling." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a thin band of brushed gold with a tiny engraved wave on the inside. She placed his in return, the same design. No diamonds, no shine. Just meaning. When Dylan pronounced them married, Maddox didn't wait for permission. He kissed her slowly, with the kind of certainty that made the world fall away. That night the inn was brighter than it had ever been. String lights looped through the trees. Music played from an old radio, and the scent of grilled vegetables and lemon chicken drifted from the backyard, where a few locals had taken over the cooking. Maddox lifted Maren in his arms without warning and spun her once in the middle of the dance circle, her laughter carrying above the music. "You're going to throw your back out," she teased. "I'll risk it." They didn't leave for a honeymoon, not yet. The inn had guests arriving the next morning, and she refused to close it for even a day. Maddox didn't argue. He just moved their mattress to the screened sunroom for the night so they could fall asleep beneath the stars. Weeks passed. September slipped into October, and the air grew cooler, the leaves turning to amber and rust. Maddox launched a new initiative through the Vale Foundation, funding small-town businesses with microgrants. The first recipient was a woman in the neighboring town who'd been trying to open a bookstore cafe for 3 years. Maren taught him how to drive stick shift using an old truck that had belonged to her grandfather. He stalled it 5 times before she let him take it alone. In November, they hosted the inn's first harvest dinner, long tables set beneath the trees, food made from local farms, and candles flickering in hand-painted jars. People came from 3 towns over. One couple asked if they could get married on the bluff next spring. "I think we're a destination now," Maren said, leaning against Maddox as they watched the guests linger long after dessert. "Then we'd better invest in more parking." By December, the inn had a waitlist that stretched into the next year. Maddox still worked with his board remotely, but the suit stayed in the back of the closet, untouched. He started writing grants in the early mornings, long before the guests woke. She painted again abstract waves in deep blues and greens that she hung along the hallways. One evening, she found him in the kitchen, staring down at a tiny pair of sneakers on the counter. "Found those at the market," he said, not looking up. "Thought they were cute." She leaned in, resting her hand on his. "We're not there yet, I know," he said. "But someday," Maren looked at him, her voice quiet. Someday, spring came quickly. The inn bloomed with it. New sheets, fresh paint, and a garden Maddox helped her plant, though he still couldn't tell the difference between basil and mint. She teased him for it every time he got it wrong. On their first anniversary, he surprised her with a rooftop dinner at the inn, candles, fresh crab, and a local cellist playing soft music in the background. "I never asked what happened to the company," she said after dinner, curled beside him under a blanket. "I sold most of it," he replied. "Kept the parts that mattered, the foundation, the people who actually gave a damn, and the penthouse. Donated it to a housing program. They turned it into transitional apartments." She turned, studying him with something between awe and disbelief. "You really did burn it all down?" "No," he said. "I just stopped pretending it was home." She kissed him without another word. Years passed. They never left the inn for long, sometimes for a weekend. Once for a week in Italy when a guest insisted on gifting them their unused villa. But they always came back. They built a life one day at a time, not perfect, just real. And on a quiet morning in June, Maren stood barefoot on the porch again, holding a mug of tea and watching the sunrise. Maddox stepped beside her, sleep still in his eyes, and wrapped an arm around her waist. "Still happy?" she asked, more than I ever imagined. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "So what now?" He looked at her, at the life they'd built, at the place that turned everything upside down and made it right. "Now," he said, "we keep going," and they did, together, always.